Ransomware is in the news again, although now the stakes seem to be much higher. Recently, Colonial Pipeline paid nearly $5 million in ransom after its operations came to a standstill following a ransomware attack. In an interesting twist, they were able to get some of that money back. Let's talk about the latest developments in ransomware response and what this means for all of us. Matt?
So at some point prior to May of 2021, hackers were able to break in and gain access to the Colonial Pipeline network in the southeastern United States. On May 6th of 2021, hackers stole hundreds of gigabytes worth of data from the internal network and exfiltrated that data to a set of overseas servers. On May 7th, 2021, they detonated a ransomware payload across the entire connected network within Colonial. Also on May 7th of 2021, Colonial agreed to pay almost $5 million in ransom, 75 Bitcoins at the time. But they paid very quietly to get a decryptor for that and bring their operations back online. Based on this, a state of emergency was declared in several states on May 9th of 2021. These states included Virginia, Florida, North Carolina. This was a big deal. So who was affected by this? Well, as it turns out, a lot of people were affected by this. This had major impacts to fuel transportation and deliveries throughout most of the United States. The Colonial Pipeline was termed a major national security incident, leading to panic buying, gas shortages, lines out the door for fuel stations, including warnings from the government warning people not to put gas in plastic bags. So again, very large scale problem.
I'd say this is one of the most impactful attacks on our critical infrastructure, wouldn't you say?
Of course.
So how did they recover, Matt?
On May 12th of 2021, media began quietly reporting that Colonial would not pay the ransom. But on that same day, Colonial began restarting its critical fuel pipeline systems slowly. It would take several days for them to fully resume pipeline operations and begin to actually deliver fuel to all of their endpoints throughout the pipeline. They purchased a decryptor, it turned out. Elliptic, a company that tracks blockchain activity, was able to verify that they did pay the ransom. The decryptor they purchased, though, was very, very slow and was not going to be sufficient to get their network back up and going in any kind of timely manner. So Colonial was forced to resort to their internal backups, which honestly should have probably been their first bet. Hopefully they'd started that a little bit before the 12th, but it was a slow process to get the entire network back up and going.
Honestly, I think there's a couple things out here that are interesting. First of all, it's interesting that they paid the ransom, but the media was reporting otherwise. And I think that's fairly common in ransomware attacks. You don't necessarily advertise that. And as of this moment, there's no law that requires that you report a ransom payment. And second, I think we often see people purchasing the decryptors, but remember, there's no guarantee in these situations. You may purchase a decryptor, but then find that your business operations are at a standstill and you need to turn to other methods in order to recover. Also, Matt, I know you've seen some cases where decryption tools are infected with additional malware, and that can slow down the process as well, correct?
It absolutely can. And we've seen that on more than one occasion where a decryption utility that's purchased to recover from a ransomware attack actually contains an additional backdoor Trojan or some other piece of malware that can really negatively impact a network and just stop recovery in its tracks.
Yeah, I think recovering from ransomware is a lot like eating a meal that's cooked by a French chef. You really want to eat it right away, but it just takes time and you can't rush it. Okay, so how did the hackers break in?
In a testimony before the United States Senate, the CEO of Colonial Pipeline mentioned that there was a simple oversight that led to hackers being able to gain access to the network. As it turns out, Colonial was utilizing a legacy VPN system that did not have any kind of account lockout or multi-factor authentication features built into it, meaning attackers compromised one single password and then gained access to essentially the entire Colonial Pipeline network at that point. They were then able to move laterally, deposit more malware, steal data, and ultimately deliver that ransomware payload.
So this is an important takeaway. We know that many ransomware incidents are caused by weak passwords and authentication issues. We need to make sure that we're paying attention to all of the passwords that are used to gain access to our networks. So who were the hackers behind the Colonial Pipeline attack? It turns out that the attack was perpetrated by partners of the ransomware as a service organization known as DarkSide. And the DarkSide ransomware gang has been behind over $90 million in ransom demands over the past 8 or 9 months. So you can see that they've only been active since about the fall of 2020, but that's still a very large volume of money that they've been able to rake in that time frame. And one of the reasons that they've been so successful is that they have a franchise model. We're starting to see this as a growing ransomware trend. So the DarkSide gang will actually run the ransomware as a service platform, and they lease access to their, quote, partners, who in turn will use it to attack victims. This is a win-win for all of the criminals who can then split the proceeds. The DarkSide gang appears to have some kind of morals, ? On their website, they claim that they will not attack targets like hospitals or, for some reason, funeral service, education, nonprofit organizations. And they have also donated to charity. After the pipeline attack, they came out with a statement that said, they didn't mean to cause problems. Our goal is to make money and not, quote, creating problems for society. So it's interesting to see that ethical conflict. They said that they were going to vet their partners more carefully in the future. What a relief.
So based on the massive exposure that DarkSide received after the Colonial Pipeline attack and the fallout from it, DarkSide began receiving a lot of criticism and a lot of pressure from both the US government, international governments, and other ransomware operators, kind of giving them a bad name. DarkSide decided to quit operation after their primary servers were taken offline. A lot of their Bitcoin was confiscated, and their ransomware as a service platform was taken down from the dark web. They were no longer able to publish stolen data at that point. DarkSide didn't quite ride off into the sunset, I think, as they originally wanted to, though. DarkSide did not pay their affiliates, which landed them in what we now understand is a hacker's court on the Russian ransomware forums that were kind of moderating between DarkSide and their affiliates. The hacker court was able to maintain a large deposit of Bitcoin in escrow from the DarkSide operators. And affiliates who had been wronged by DarkSide and had not been paid had to go through essentially an appeals process where they had to present their case to a moderator in order to receive those funds. We have some great indications of people coming in and trying to just jump on the bandwagon, claiming they were ransomware operators, being denied by the arbitrator, other people being paid out in full for this. So it was a really interesting development to see that kind of justice system exists in the criminal underworld.
Now, for those of you who may be surprised about the concept of hacker court, we did a little bit of digging into this. And what we found was that the deposit was made and the money was held in escrow, in part to make the franchisees feel more comfortable doing the work, because then they had a greater reassurance that they could get paid for it. And indeed, that had to occur in this case, where the arbitrator of the hacker court, the judge in this case, in some cases approved claims, and the affiliates were paid. Due to the attack on critical infrastructure, there's been a huge fallout as a result. Some of the fallout that's occurred has been a backlash on ransom payments. Not that anybody wants to pay a ransom payment, but there's been a lot of talk about making ransom payments illegal, something that would have a big impact on anyone who is a victim in these cases. In fact, the Energy Secretary in the United States came out and said she would support a law banning ransomware payments. The criminals, however, said they were undeterred. Some issues with banning ransom payments are that, first of all, the United States is not the only country that ransomware gangs target, of course, and the criminals would still be able to receive payments in other countries. It also puts victims in a very difficult situation. In a lot of cases, they're desperate. They may be at risk of going out of business. And also some of them that are in the know or able to pull strings may be able to circumvent that regulation and pay the ransom anyway. So there are some, if you're wondering why ransom payments aren't immediately banned, it's because in the heat of the crisis, sometimes it is the only option to save a US organization when their backups have failed. The REvil ransomware gang, which has been the top form of ransomware that we've seen in the past year, came out and said that if US legislation were passed, it would not be a deterrent for future attacks. So they are tracking US laws, and they've come out and said that they don't care, they would attack organizations anyway. And they probably don't care if they take an organization down and it just dies. Another result of this is that some lawmakers are saying that ransom payments should be disclosed. And we've seen some precedent for this in the healthcare industry. We see a requirement under high tech for certain data breaches to be disclosed. So it may be the case that going forward, we would have to announce or publicly disclose that a ransom payment has been made. So keep your eyes on this. It might be something coming down the pipeline. Also, happily, we've seen some proactive regulation come out of this. And personally, that's something I like to see because obviously an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. In this case, Department of Homeland Security has issued the first cybersecurity regulation that is specifically for pipelines. So it is very narrowly focused, aimed at pipeline operators, but it is a proactive cybersecurity regulation. And there's a chance we may see additional regulations hitting critical infrastructure going forward.
So we did get a little bit of good news out of this case, which we don't normally get to see in ransomware cases. A decent chunk of the ransom that was paid to DarkSide in the Colonial Pipeline incident was able to be recovered by federal authorities. Now, they haven't exactly made clear how this was made possible, but the FBI was able to track the Bitcoin mixing that happens after a standard ransom payment, where attackers will take a large sum of Bitcoin and distribute it among hundreds of different cryptocurrency wallets to attempt to kind of mask their activities. They were able to spot a transaction of 63.7 Bitcoins that landed on an exchange inside of the United States. And through a combination of FBI magic and subpoenas, they were able to recover that 63.7 Bitcoin from the exchange. Now, Bitcoin had dropped in value since the payment had been made. So monetarily or dollar-wise, that wasn't the same as 63.7 Bitcoin when it was made, but it's still a sizable chunk of cryptocurrency that was recovered in this case.
Well, Matt, I know we've seen a trend on the dark web of criminals asking for payment in Monero and other forms of cryptocurrency, correct? Did we see a request for that in this case, or can you tell us a little bit more about that trend?
So in this case, the exact ransom note wasn't made public, but in other cases where DarkSide notes have been made public, operators like DarkSide and DarkSide themselves will normally offer a discount on the ransom payment if a payment is made in Monero or another kind of anonymized cryptocurrency. Now, insurance companies oftentimes will not cover that. They want Bitcoin to be the currency if they are going to be footing the bill and making that payment. But it's interesting to see the shift towards the more anonymized payments. Dark web marketplaces also are starting to shift more into things like Monero so that their payments can't be tracked either.
Yeah, that's a great point. Make sure that you check your insurance coverage carefully because how you make that payment may actually affect whether or not you get coverage. All right, so what are our key takeaways? What can we learn from the Colonial Pipeline hack and the DarkSide group? Well, first of all, there may be times where it's possible, but it's entirely likely that we may see some legislation that restricts our ability to make ransom payments. And we're already seeing additional scrutiny by the Department of Treasury. Also, you may be required to report ransom payments going forward. And in fact, that may be retroactive. So just keep in mind that any payment you make may be scrutinized down the road and act accordingly. Again, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, so make sure you have great backups. It's important to be in a position where you can recover from backups if you are hit by ransomware. Stay aware of the latest developments and trends and make sure that you're updating your incident response processes accordingly. And finally, check your insurance coverage. Make sure you understand what's covered and what's not. Remember, if legislation makes it impossible or illegal for you to make ransom payments, then even if you have insurance coverage, your insurer may not be able to pay out. And of course, make sure you understand the ins and outs, the method of payment, or any restrictions on the timing, things like that, so that you can maximize the value of your insurance coverage. Also, make sure that you're checking your perimeter security and you understand how your network is accessed. Make sure that you're not using weak passwords and implement two-factor authentication wherever you can.
Thanks for watching. This is Matt and Sherry with LMG Security. Like, subscribe, and follow us on Twitter at LMG Security.